Good morning and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. We don't often turn to the book of Lamentations nowadays. In fact, it's so obscure you might not have realized that there even was a book in the Bible called Lamentations. You will find it right after the book of Jeremiah, and it is often thought to have been written by Jeremiah as well. The book of Lamentations is a series of laments that are written after Babylon has destroyed Jerusalem and carried the people off into exile. They expressed their sorrow over the destruction, and more, they understood that this all happened because they had forsaken God. They lamented their own faithlessness and the loss of their homeland. Yet even so, there is an abiding trust and hope in God underneath it all. As they wait to be redeemed, they trust in God. There are two verses in Lamentations that highlight this especially. Right in the middle of the book, we find verses that talk about God's steadfast love and that mercies from God come new every morning. Maybe you know the hymn, Great is Thy Faithfulness, which is based on these verses. What an astounding affirmation amongst a people who felt like God had abandoned them to call on the faithfulness of God. Then, just a few verses later, we have Lamentations 3, verse 25. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him. It was a gentle reminder and a call to faith. Here in Advent, we are looking at some stories of people who waited for God to act in their lives. It didn't always come quickly or as soon as they would have liked, but they trusted in the faithfulness of God, and it did come. Today we want to look at Jacob. I always speak of Jacob and what a scoundrel he was, at least in his youth. I've commented to many that if you had Jacob over to dinner at your house, you would count the silverware before he left to make sure he didn't steal any. In fact, his name means he supplants or takes the place of. What you have, Jacob tries to get for himself, at least until he met his match with his uncle. Jacob had lots of misadventures as a young man, first supplanting his brother for his birthright inheritance, and then supplanting him again to get their father's blessing, which had been intended for Esau. Esau was so angry that he vowed to kill Jacob, and Jacob fled back to their relatives in Haran. There Jacob saw and fell in love with Rachel and wanted to marry her. He made an arrangement with her father, his uncle Laban, that he would work for 7 years and then she would be given to him in marriage. So for 7 years he worked, and for 7 years he waited. Finally the time came, but when the wedding feast was over, Jacob, probably a little tipsy from the party, entered the dark tent to his new bride, and in the morning found that he had spent the night with Leah, Rachel's sister, instead of Rachel. He had worked for 7 years for Rachel and had been given Leah instead. Laban answered his complaint by saying that Leah was the older sister, and you didn't marry off the younger before the older. But if Jacob would work for another 7 years, he could have Rachel too. Now, before you get worked up about plural marriage, that's how things were done then. They were different times from ours. Now, it's not as bad as you might think. The actual deal was that Jacob and Leah would complete a short period, sort of like a honeymoon, and then Rachel would be given to Jacob in marriage, and then Jacob would work for another 7 years. So, while he had to work for that period, he wasn't waiting all that extra time for the woman he loved. So where is God in all this? Well, in all that happened, God never left Jacob. And when it came time for Jacob to go home and reconcile with Esau, God was with him and blessed him. As the verse from Lamentations said, "The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul that seeks him." It was true for Jacob. It's true for us. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.